The Federal Reserve is never going to end itself. And because it's the engine that powers the biggest government in the history of the planet, we should never wait on Congress or any other federal branch to cut off their own private money printer. Instead, like every attack on the Constitution and your liberty, we should follow the founder's strategy and advice on the state, local, and individual level to nullify the Federal Reserve from the bottom up. And today I've got 6 essential steps to get the ball rolling in your area right now. But first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the Path to Liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the Fast Friday edition of the show for June 7th, 2024. And let's get right to this. But to kick it off, I want to start out with a little reminder of the strategy that we follow from the founders themselves. Stop federal programs without waiting on the federal government to magically do what it never does, which is limit its own power. And James Madison had a great summary of this particular approach in Federalist 46, where he emphasized that states and individuals should use what he called legislative devices and a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union to defeat federal acts and programs. I covered this in some detail in what I consider maybe the most important episode I've done. Maybe it's not the best one, but it's incredibly important. Constitution 101 Enforcement Mechanism. That'll be linked to in the show notes. Alan Mosley will get that organized, and I'll get it published over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty in a couple of hours. So I do encourage you to check out that episode as well. But let's get right to our top steps to nullify the Federal Reserve from the bottom up. And first of all, it is important to point out that these are all focused on advancing gold and silver as money rather than dirty government fiat. That's the tool they use to fund all of their programs, both here and abroad. Now, I realize, especially in a digital age that we live in, that many people want something different, and that's cool. I'm not an expert in that, but I do believe that much of this could be replicated to other tools that you want to use as a medium of exchange, especially step number 6, which is the most important no matter what approach we take. Step number 6 is the best. I've kept it for last. Hopefully you'll stick around and check that out. So let's start this off. Step 1 is this. Declare gold and silver to be legal tender in your state, as they always should have been. Now, all the states have been terrible on this for a long, long time. But thankfully, in 2011, Utah became the first state in modern times, as Mike Meharry reports in a new article, to recognize gold and silver as legal tender with the passage of a Legal Tender Act. That law made gold and silver coins issued only by the federal government as legal tender in the state. Now, in practice, the important point that the value of gold and silver coins under the act is based on their market value, based on weight, instead of the face value. And that's a big difference because a 1-ounce American Gold Eagle is a face value of $50. And we know it's $2,300, $2,400, and it's going to go up from there. So to pay someone, hey, I'll pay you this amount, but it's only $50 when the value is $2,300, it's not workable. So that is a huge change that we saw there. And in effect, declaring gold and silver as legal tender expressly told the people of Utah that they could freely begin using them as money rather than as just a mere investment vehicle like the feds and government at all levels have wanted for a long, long time. But the important point is, since it was only gold coins minted by the U.S. government, it was still very limited. So that brings me to step number 2, which is expand the definition of legal tender to go beyond that. A handful of states have now passed legal tender laws like Utah, but most of them tend to be very limited. And the next step, Mike says, is states that have passed laws to treat only U.S. minted gold and silver coins as legal tender, should move to expand that definition to include other types of gold and silver bullion. We've seen things like foreign and privately minted products as well. Foreign gold coins. The Spanish dollar, for example, foreign coins were very important. The Spanish dollar was considered legal tender in the United States until 1857, so the entire founding generation used a foreign coin. Mike points out that in 2012, year 2, Utah expanded the definition of what was considered legal tender to include anything that a court of competent jurisdiction determines is legal tender. So, and that actually happened in Utah. And even though it took a court to do this, the essential change is that the power was shifted away from Washington, D.C. to the state of Utah, and Utah makes its own determination now of what Utah considers legal tender gold and silver. And the effect has been very significant. Since that time, there's been some other things that they've done as well, which we'll follow up here in just a moment. But various things that they've done have allowed the creation of the UPMA, United Precious Metals Association, in partnership with Alpine Gold Exchange to create a depository, basically a gold bank. You can deposit stuff there. You can conduct business. You can even get a debit card and do online transactions in gold and silver. And the Utah Specie Legal Tender Act also led to the creation of the Goldback, which is, I think, one of the coolest things created in modern times. Here it is up on the screen. These things are beautiful. This is physical spendable gold in small amounts for even small transactions. They describe it as a local voluntary medium of exchange, notes made from fractions of an ounce of physical gold. I don't know the technology behind it, but it's pretty awesome. Step number 3 is get rid of taxes, repeal taxes, sales and capital gains tax. If you tax money, government is basically saying it's not money, because you don't tax money in and of itself. You tax labor, you tax everything else, but not money. And Mike says that taxes on precious metals erect barriers to using gold and silver as money by raising transaction costs. And we know the power to tax is the power to destroy. If you add 5% tax on something, that raises the cost, and people will generally not do that very often unless they're a total believer and have the extra loot on hand to be able to pull it off. Much more difficult as they continue devaluing the fiat money. Mike says taxing creates the impression on top of it, a psychological impact, that gold and silver aren't money at all. And the way it plays out, there's sales tax and capital gains, and they're both terrible, but sales plays out like this. Imagine if you asked a grocery clerk to break a $5 bill and he charged you a 35-cent tax. Silly, right? After all, you are only exchanging one form of money for another, but that's essentially what sales taxes on gold and silver bullion do. They're not saying you're making an exchange of money for money. They're just saying, oh, if this guy decides to give you, to break the $5 whatever note of gold back, for example, they're saying, no, you're actually selling it. And then we want to collect whatever, 5 or 10%. It depends on the state, of course. Now, capital gains taxes can be even more nasty. And Mike explains it like this. For example, if you exchange $20 of fiat money for a 1-ounce silver coin, and then the price rises to $30, when you spend that $30, the government will tax you the $10 increase in value as soon as you make that purchase, because again, you're not using it as money. In essence, even if it's magical and it doesn't even happen in practice, that's the way they count it under their tax law or their tax rules, that you've technically sold the $30 and therefore you've made a $10 profit, and then they're going to charge you a capital gains tax as well. And the capital gains taxes can be pretty high. Now, Mike points out that you can address these things in one step or in multiple steps. And generally, I think, and in my experience as I've watched this, anytime we see people trying to do a bunch of things at the same time, whether it's on gold and silver or on any other issue, the more that people try to do, the more likely it's going to be that they get nothing passed. Instead, we follow Thomas Jefferson's strategy, which is the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. We must be contented to secure what we can get from time to time and eternally press forward for what is yet to get. Small steps forward give us the foundation to have more steps forward. And when you try to bite off too much, generally you get 0 steps forward. But we see an interesting approach that happened on at least the taxes in Alabama so far. And Mike points out that Alabama has already taken 3 steps to end state taxation of gold and silver. First, it passed a 5-year suspension of its sales tax in 2018. So it was only going to pause it for 5 years. Then, because there was enough support for it, they extended the exemption to 10 years. Now, we know they're going to have to do another follow-up. Either they have to extend it again, or we'd rather them just get rid of the sales tax permanently before it expires in 2028. But this year here in 2024, they took another step and got rid of state capital gains tax on gold and silver bullion. In Utah, somewhere in this process, they've passed a number of bills on sound money. they followed up with an act that expressly removed sales taxes from the gold back. Because when the gold back was first issued, there were questions. Oh, is the state going to tax this as a commodity? No, we're going to treat it as money, and we're not going to do any taxes on the gold back. And that allows it to be used, or creates an environment where the people can use it more and more. Now, we still have a big problem of the IRS. And of course, that's always an issue. And they still want their piece. They're like the mob. And there are federal capital gains taxes, not just state. The feds don't have a sales tax, at least yet, but the federal capital gains taxes often run higher on gold and silver. They can be as high as 28%, which is a massive roadblock to their use. And Mike points out that Utah came up with a really creative approach to offset some of this. They have a non-refundable credit for any federal capital gains tax you're going to get from exchanging one form of tender for another. And here's a simplified example, Mike says. If you bought $1,000 in gold and the price went to $2,000 in fiat, the IRS would expect you to report $1,000 in capital gains as income for tax purposes once you sell it or you use it as money. As soon as you use it or exchange it for something else, the feds want the capital gains tax. Now, it generally runs 20+%. Mike used an example where it was an average of 24%. And so that means when you spend the $2,000 gold coin, the U.S. government wants $240. So what Utah did, they passed a law that gives a partial tax credit in the state taxes of 4.65%. So in this example, you'd get almost a 20% reduction in the impact of the federal capital gains tax. We think that's a solid step forward. It's not enough. They should increase that offset to 100%. I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but at least we got to put that out there and work towards it. So taxes are really important to address as well. Next up are depositories, or a holding facility, a gold bank, something that you can use. Now, we've seen the privately owned and operated UPMA in Utah. There's also the state-run, well, I think it's actually run by a private business, but it's a public-private partnership type of thing. Basically, it's the government, the Texas Bullion Depository. Now, UPMA in Utah already has a system where you can link a debit card and do transactions in a digital age anywhere that they accept the debit card. I don't know if it's got a Visa logo on it or what, and it seamlessly deducts from your account online electronically. So this is an important part of the modern economy, is people want to do business online. They want to buy stuff, have it shipped. Well, you can spend gold and then buy and replace. Spend and replace is really the way to do it. Now, from my understanding, they want to do this in Texas as well. I'm not sure the progress on that. It's government, so it's probably very slow, if at all. I know they've talked about doing that. So maybe if someone lives in Texas and they're aware, who knows? But this is a very important step in this process as well. It's also about establishing businesses that can help facilitate even more commerce. Number 5 is gold contract clauses. This may sound weird, but the principle behind a gold clause in a contract is really very straightforward. It's actually pretty simple. It basically stipulates that payment must be made in a specific amount of gold or its paper equivalent. So you could stipulate in contract that, okay, you're going to pay your mortgage in 2 ounces of gold. And it doesn't matter what the US dollar is worth in 10 years when you're paying your mortgage. It's still 2 ounces of gold. You're paying your 2 ounces of gold. That stays steady all the way through in contract. Now, if you want to pay in paper, you can. Now, these were very, very common in the United States for a long time. Maybe not on mortgages. I'm not sure how they were used, but they were very, very common. But they were banned by our buddy FDR, that great constitutionalist, right? Back in the New Deal. They got rid of them. They finally overturned that sometime in the 70s, and they've been very slow to come back into use. So that's why the power to tax and the power to ban stuff really can get the public, the people, out of the habit of using things as money. And I think that was one of the greatest impacts of the so-called gold confiscation order from FDR, really the follow-up acts where they said you couldn't use it as money, you couldn't use it in contracts. Violating the rule of contracts is a serious business, but it really, really destroyed the market. Now, we start seeing some things turn around very slowly, and just this year, Louisiana became the 5th state with a legal tender act treating gold and silver as legal tender. That just passed it in the last few days. It just got signed by the governor, and it's going into effect August 1st of 2024. But in that law, there's a clause specifying, quote, that no person shall incur any liability for refusal to accept recognized legal tender for the payments of debts except as provided by contract. So Louisiana is now expressly saying, starting in August of this year, that you can have a contract that stipulates payment in gold and silver. Now, in the past, because of the inflation, which is really a double hit on the capital gains, if you think about it, like they depreciate the value of the money, the gold holds the same money, and then they want to tax you again on how much less the dollar is worth in relationship to the gold. So over the years, since they banned gold in contracts, a lot of people have been slow to coming back with them because they claim that, like, usury laws basically say, oh, this is a huge interest rate. Now, if it's an ounce of gold at $2,000, what happens if the gold goes to $5,000? That's a $3,000 interest rate. But Louisiana has a nice approach on this, moving towards allowing people to have contracts based in gold and silver. And number 6, that brings us to number 6, which I promised you was the most important. I don't have a ton to say about it, but ultimately the most important thing to understand is all these state level laws, these state level acts, repealing taxes, treating things as gold, as legal tender, creating depositories. None of this stuff can have any impact at all if the people still only use the fiat trash that they call the US dollar instead of gold and silver. And that's why number 6, human action, is actually the most important step by far. And ultimately, even if the states don't do the right thing, human action can overwhelm the states, and then the states have to try to do the right thing to look good for their people. So ultimately, human action is the start, the beginning, and the finish of all of this. And Mike says, simply put, state action alone won't accomplish the goal. It can't. In the end, he says, it's up to the people. They have to take advantage of the doors opened by state action, or they create an environment where the state feels compelled to open those doors. And then they also have to reject the government fiat and embrace sound money. Well, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. More important than anything, I hope you learned something. If you want to help us reach and teach more people with this essential strategic information, we can replicate this kind of thing on all kinds of issues. Nothing helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. If you got a couple of bucks of that quickly depreciating, dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. If you want to send us gold backs, you can do it by mail. We got to figure out a way to include that in our shopping cart as well, because we absolutely accept sound money. We prefer it, but we realize that the easiest and quickest way is through current e-commerce transactions. So that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We'll get a blog post published with the show links for this episode in a couple of hours over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Also, if you prefer to do a one-time donation, you can do 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Whatever works best for you works best for me. I'm extremely grateful for any consideration you can give to putting your financial faith behind our work as we hit our 18-year anniversary later this month. Help us kick off the next 18 years and build a strong foundation for liberty in the future. Again, I really appreciate